How's it going, everybody? This podcast is brought to you by Rise Make Life Workout, a health, self-development, and lifestyle platform building a passionate community of knowledge seekers, creative dreamers, and future leaders.
For details on the latest Rise event that will feature expert speakers in the field of self-development and growth, check out www.rise-workout.com.
That's www.rise-workout.com. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Rise Optimize, where we make science simple to help you optimize your health. My name's Shanae and I'm joined today by Dr. Shah.
Hello.
Hello, hello. To begin today, we are going to cover some feedback that we received on our last episode regarding returning to training or sport after COVID and some other reflections.
Yeah, so I had several people approach me saying they were reassured by it. I don't know if you had the same sort of...
Yeah, I had a few people that were just sort of, they just said it sort of did clear up the noise that was out there.
So I think that basically the main message being just getting back into it gradually is really important, and giving yourself time to recover when you are very sick. Staying away from exercise is sort of in line generally with some of the other articles that have come out, particularly in the last 2 weeks, about long COVID, which we actually didn't cover. That was an oversight on my part. It wasn't really reflected in a lot of the research that I looked at, even though we know that it does seem to be a risk, and they still don't really know that much about it. But I think if you sort of go on the side of caution that we went on, which is going back into it gradually and check in with yourself, then you reduce your chances, it seems like, or you're likely to, or catch it early if you maybe are starting to experience things that suggest you have long COVID.
And some suggestions as well for those that might sort of struggle getting back into exercise gradually, or feel that they don't have that self-control to sort of dial back that intensity, particularly, if they are participating in something like Crossfit, where you rock up and the program's up of what you're doing for the day, and you might not have as many options in what you do.
Yes, yeah. So, and what we talked about is when we're talking about intensities, it's easier to translate that onto endurance exercise, and it's a bit harder to see how that maps onto resistance type exercise or things like CrossFit or group fit classes. We probably should have spent a bit more time on that. But one of the things I think can be helpful is to try to refocus that period of time that you're getting back into it on. If you are doing something like CrossFit, it's a good time to drill technique, because there's a lot of technique elements to all of the different movements in CrossFit. They're quite complex movements, so it could be a really good opportunity for you to do that and still feel like you're progressing, but not having to work at that same intensity, not chasing 1RMs or doing these massive like monster WODs or anything like that. Even going back to a broomstick, that's one of the best ways to work on your Olympic weightlifting. Or if you're drilling gymnastics movements, only doing like shorter sets of them and just trying to go for really good quality. For coaches and things for CrossFit, I've heard of some gyms, they've got a separate section of programming at the moment for people who are coming back in from COVID, which I think is a really great way to go.
Yeah.
If you're sort of managing it, I'm not sure, how would you manage it if someone at the start of like a Les Mills class came up to you and were like, I'm just getting back in from COVID?
Yeah, I guess I'd go through sort of some of their options in regards to where they can sort of pull back and just reassure them that if they need to, that they can do what we refer to as start smart, which is even usually for new people coming into group fitness, is just doing, for example, like for a 1 hour body pump class, you just do the first half of the class, so that first 30 minutes, and then gradually add on a track each time you come back and build yourself back up to a full class.
That's a great suggestion to go back to that, because I'm sure people who are like veterans at body pump have forgotten about smart start.
Yeah, smart start, yeah. And or similar, like you said, things like, the squat track and the bench track, you might want to be cutting back on your weight and just, again, focusing on your range, focusing on that technique versus just going back to your same weights as before.
Yeah. Don't go back to the same weights again.
You'll regret that.
You'll be breathless in the warm-up track. Yeah. Like, oh God, what have I done? And if that happens, then leave the class. If it's really bad, stop.
Yes, that's
Just
the other thing
stop.
is you might feel good and like you said, but getting into it, you might think, oh crap, I have lost a bit of fitness, or well,
Or I'm
I
still
already
feeling
feel, yeah, or
symptoms,
I'm still feeling quite out of breath. It's okay then to think, okay, actually I'm not going to be able to do this whole class today, and yeah, you might leave 15 minutes in, or you might leave half an hour in, but that's better than trying to push yourself through that whole hour workout and then regret it for the next few days and not be able to do anything for the next few days, versus being able to gradually do a little bit of something each day.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I was talking to one of my friends about is if you know you're going to get into the class and you'll get too excited and just go ham the whole way through, irrespective of how you feel, maybe just take that off the table for a while and do what we talked about before, like refocus on something else. Maybe you could work on your mobility, maybe you could go for a walk. There's still ways that you can move without having to introduce straight back into high intensity. Yeah.
Definitely. There's like you said, there's some workouts that you can't really, there's not many lower intensity options in them, like grit or sprint, things like that. You can't, the only choice is go hard or go home in those situations. And the other thing we'd touched on last week was about the risk of myocarditis with COVID, and I'd said that maybe it was potentially less of a risk given that Omicron seemed to be a more mild strain compared to the others, but maybe not.
I had a little bit of a think about this and then a look at what some immunologists were saying, and the prediction there is that because the actual way that it affects the heart, the virus affects the heart, it's pretty much the same between strains, and so they were expecting that the risk would remain for myocarditis would remain about the same with Omicron as with other ones. So, so
same as what we kind of said last week, sort of still being mindful of your symptoms.
Yeah, but not letting it add to your health anxiety too much.
Yes.
Do what you can do to do what's within your realm of control when it comes, if you do get COVID. I mean, the easiest way to avoid it is to not get COVID, but not all of us are in that situation anymore. So, but
it's still doing the rounds. I feel for people that go through being a household contact and then they end up, like, once everyone else has gone through it, it's like that day 10 and then they get it. So then they have to isolate even longer. So it does end up being, almost 2-3 weeks versus that initial 7 days, which is very unfortunate. But anyway, on to today's topic. We are talking about supplementing with creatine and beta-alanine.
Yeah, so these two supplements, I thought it would be good to put them in the same episode because they're similar in that when you supplement with them, you have to have supplemented with them for a minimum period of time for them to start to be effective, and you need to continue supplementing with them. Another way to put that is, so the dose that you're taking on the day is not affecting your workout on that day. It's not having an acute effect like what caffeine is. So once you start taking it and you're with the goal of seeing the benefits that they can offer you, then you need to continually take it in order to continue seeing those benefits. And it won't it's not going to work straight away. It'll work after a minimum period of time for each. And then also another reason of grouping them together is because the way that they work is related to how they interact with our energy systems that provide us with the energy to perform exercise or work. And so I thought it would be a good chance to kind of group together some chat about bioenergetics. Because just sort of having a little bit of a deeper understanding of how they work and why they work hopefully will give you a better position to make a decision about whether or not you should be taking them, or whether whether they're going to be useful for the type of training that you do or not, or whether perhaps you could recommend them to a client or a friend. If you're in the position of, if you might be a PT or something like that.
Cool. All right, well, we can kick it off with creatine. What is creatine? How does it work?
So creatine, I've actually done quite a bit of work with creatine in the lab. One of the grad students I'm working with now is currently using it in his studies, so I'm reasonably familiar with it. So creatine is just a compound. It's made up of 2 amino acids, and we actually produce creatine ourselves endogenously. We make about, I think it's around 2 grams a day of creatine, but we can also get it from the diet. Largely it comes from meat and fish, and so people on plant-based diets are not going to be getting that sort of added creatine from their diet as much. And so what creatine does is it's largely stored in skeletal muscle. Over 90% of it resides in our muscles, and it plays a really important role in one of the energy systems that largely provides the gas for us to engage in high intensity, short duration work, essentially. So hopefully most people will be familiar with the energy currency of the cell, or ATP.
ATP,
Yeah, adenosine triphosphate, that old chestnut. So the main goal, we have three main energy systems that essentially their main goal is to keep ATP levels in our cells, and in the case of exercise in our muscles, relatively constant, so we can continually be accessing that to transform that energy into mechanical work. The way that it does that is ATP, it's got 3 phosphate bonds, they're all high energy ones. When you cleave off a phosphate, it releases energy, and that's what's transformed into mechanical work. Creatine is stored in the muscle as creatine phosphate or phosphocreatine, and the advantage of storing it that way, you can tell by the name that it's got a phosphate in it, so it's got one of those phosphate molecules there. The advantage of having high stores of creatine in the muscles is that when we start to do high intensity short duration work, there's a really fast reaction that can happen that can break off that phosphate and that creatine and donate the phosphate to ADP to replenish it to ATP.
Oh, okay.
And in that way, you're like adding to that energy. You've got a big bank, basically, of energy currency that can replenish the ATP in order to continue doing work. So when you supplement with creatine, it results in an increase in phosphocreatine stores, and in doing so, it increases your capacity for doing like high intensity, short duration work. So that confers over to activities like lifting in the gym, or doing repeated effort sprints, if that might be like on a track, or it could be as part of a team sport as well, so hockey, soccer. So yeah, that's basically the role that creatine has from an exercise performance perspective. And it's been pretty well proven that if you supplement with creatine at least 5 grams a day for 20, we'll get into this, but for 28 days, or you can load with it, that it does correspond to a significant increase in your phosphocreatine stores in your muscle, and then all of those kind of benefits that we talked about before, or some of those benefits that we talked about before. Yeah.
Epic. And because so how you said it adds that extra phosphate in to help ADP get back to ATP. So would the body normally be able to do that itself, but obviously at a slower rate?
Yeah. You've
and
got
obviously creatine, it's just like you've got it there, so it's like boom, it's a lot quicker for it to get it back to ATP.
Yeah, exactly. So because if we're generally producing around 2 grams of creatine a day, that's then distributed throughout the body, mostly in our skeletal muscle. We haven't like saturated the amount that we possibly could store in our muscle, and that's where the supplementation comes in, because you're able to top it up further. Okay. Your muscles have a greater capacity than what we're just sort of naturally, endogenously producing to store more, and in doing so you increase the capacity of muscle for work that utilizes that energy system.
Yeah, so like you touched on it, sort of more for that high intensity, short, sharp, fast kind of movement.
Yeah.
So is it as applicable then for people that are doing more endurance-based sports?
It actually is, surprisingly. Okay. So for a long time, it's only ever really been recommended for what you just said before, the high intensity intermittent like resistance training or repeated sprint type stuff. But it does seem like it has benefits for other sports and also other health benefits as well, which is why it's quite an interesting compound, really. So with endurance sport, it looks like if you're taking creatine and you're trying to replenish your glycogen stores, it assists in that. So it assists in glycogen replenishment after exercise. Also, it seems to help somewhat with inflammation as well. So people who are doing really long distance events like marathons, long distance running, it can assist with that as well. It's also been looked at for its therapeutic potential in different clinical populations. One area that I was reading about, which actually I hadn't read too much about was its role in attenuating or reducing sarcopenia or age-related muscle loss. Yeah, so even though my mum, for example, is like, she largely does running but also does resistance training regularly, this would actually be quite a good supplement that I would recommend to her, because she's got all of the, you know, the baseline diet and good habits all nailed, but this would be something that could actually be really helpful as she continues on to exercise like the machine that she is. Yeah.
Wow, go your mum.
Yeah.
My mum, are you listening? So it seems like if it's taken and coupled with training, that it does have quite a lot of added benefits compared to training alone.
Yeah, so you need, it's really important to have that training stimulus alongside of supplementation for it to confer some of the benefits around like improving your muscle mass and strength adaptations as well. So like increasing the amount that you can lift. There's also some things, because of how it increases your tolerance to training and is associated with those improvements in strength and muscle mass, it also might help to improve your bone health as well, because you're adding more load essentially onto your muscles when you're moving, if you're building more mass, as well as the fact that it seems to somehow get into the cells within your bones too and confer a benefit there. So it's kind of a bit of a wonder supplement. It's starting to sound like, isn't it?
Well, it is. Yeah. So how do we supplement creatine, and what should we be looking for when we do consider it? Like, how much should people be taking?
Yeah, so like I alluded to at the beginning, a lot of people don't realize that you have to supplement with it for a minimum period of time for it to be effective, and then you need to continue supplementing with it. So there are two ways that you could do it. One way, which is the more sort of traditional, I guess, like gym bro way, is that you'll hear gym bros talking about this, about a loading phase with creatine, where you take it for 7 days at a 20-gram dosage per day. And then after that 7 days, you take a maintenance dose of 5 grams per day for however long you want to. With the 20 grams per day, basically the purpose of that for the week is to saturate your muscles with phosphocreatine, get it to that sort of upper threshold really quickly, and then the maintenance dose will just sort of top it off, because you'll be endogenously making it and then also getting it from your diet, and the additional 5 grams is enough to keep them at that heightened level of phosphocreatine. Yeah, so that's one way to do it. That's really good if you want to basically reap the benefits of training with it really quickly, or maybe you have an event and you want to try to get your creatine stores up really fast. Just on that, with the 20 gram per day dosage, you can try take it all at once, but it might result in some gastro distress as well. So doing that, be better to spread it out if you can. Yeah, 20 grams is quite a lot to like wallop into a glass of water. So the second way that you could do it is you can just start taking 5 grams a day, and you'll reach that same saturation point of phosphocreatine in your muscle in 28 days instead. So the same point as what you would after a week of supplementing with 20 grams a day. You'll reach that in 28 days with a 5 gram dose instead of 7 days. And then you just can keep taking it. One of the things that sort of was talked about when I first learned about creatine a long time ago was the recommendation that you should cycle on and off it. It turns out that it's safe actually to not cycle off it. So sometimes people would take creatine for a certain training cycle to kind of get the better quality training that they're looking for from their weightlifting or something, and then go into an event with it, and then they might cycle off it for, it takes about 6 weeks as like a kind of washout period, and then they might cycle back on for another training cycle. It turns out you don't need to do that, because it's safe enough at that 5 gram dosage to just continually take it if you like. For athletes who maybe want to like that mental break of not having to take their supplements in their off season, then you know, you can stop it, but just be mindful of how you're loading back up again and what time frame you want to do that in, whether you're okay to go in a 28-day time frame or whether you want to get up to speed a lot quicker. Yeah.
And are there any risks with supplementing with it? Like you said, it's obviously okay to sort of have it in your system year round without having to cycle on and off, but are there any other risks at all associated with creatine?
Not really, no. So one thing to note is that particularly when you load with it quickly, people experience weight gain. That is related to, so when creatine is stored in the muscle, it's also stored with a water molecule.
Okay.
And so when you're storing more of it in your muscle, you're also pulling water into the muscle as well. And that's where people will, depending on how muscly you are, how big your muscle mass is, the weight gain will be somewhere around a kg, maybe less if you're smaller. So that maybe could be considered an adverse effect, depending on how you feel about that and how it plays in with your training and your sport.
So some of the gym bros might be like, gains already.
Yeah, well, yeah, you hear that. You do hear that. And
so it's like, calm down, it's water.
Yeah, you've still got to do like the 8-week cycle of strength training before you can actually say that you've put on proper mass. Yeah. So that could be considered it's not so much a risk, it's just more a consideration. For example, we talked about it being used in people who do endurance training. If you're a runner or a cyclist and hills are your forte, then you might look at that and be like, oh no, I don't want to have to carry an extra kg up the hills. But at the same time, you could make an argument that having the water in there might be useful in keeping the cell hydrated as well. So and you just have to weigh up the benefit that you're getting from it versus that. But I don't really think it's too much of a big deal, especially for, like, I use creatine and I think I probably notice it is about a kg of extra weight, but it doesn't bother me too much.
So is it just a myth then that creatine can cause hair loss or kidney distress and things like that?
Are those ones that you've heard?
Yeah.
So the creatine and hair loss one, it turns out that came from one study that's just stayed around since then. It was a study done on rugby players, and so they gave them creatine, placebo, put them on a training program, etc. In addition to measuring their strength outcomes and things like that, they also measured a hormone called DHT, and DHT is associated with hair loss in men, and it was seen to be significantly elevated, not a huge amount, but elevated in the creatine group. One of the issues with that is that they just concluded that it resulted in hair loss without like checking that they over time if they actually experienced any hair loss. They used that association of DHT and hair loss to conclude that creatine causes hair loss. So you can kind of see a few gaps in that. If you were going to confirm that, then you would want a more rigorous study that followed up to actually confirm that resulted in it. That was done a couple of decades ago, I think. So you think of the amount of creatine use that has happened since then, and hair loss has not come out in the literature as one of the adverse effects. We would have
known about it by now.
So no, it doesn't result in hair loss. I mean, there's a bunch of problems with that study in what they didn't control for. Like, there were no females in it, the age range was really restricted, also not controlling for genetic factors that are linked to baldness as well, in addition to not actually observing whether or not they experience hair loss. So and then when it comes to kidney function, this was actually one of the reasons why I think it was recommended to cycle on and off it, because of this fear around taking creatine for long periods, putting stress on your kidneys. One of the things that this is related to is that when creatine's broken down in the body, it's converted to creatinine, which is used by doctors as like an indication of load on the kidneys, I think. And people, I mean, people who exercise regularly are going to have higher creatinine levels than someone who doesn't, for example, but that doesn't reflect poor kidney function. And it's a similar thing with supplementing with creatine and having higher levels of creatinine. It's not actually resulting in extra load on the kidney. So yeah, I think most GPs and stuff, if they saw that, would probably realise that now, but some may not and might be concerned and then tell their patients, oh, don't supplement with that anymore. But yeah, the duress on the kidney function is a myth, it turns out.
Interesting. I find sometimes when it can be one study that, you know, can blow up to be, and it can be just rumoured around of like, oh, creatine causes hair loss from like one sort of really not well done study. Anyway, so are there any populations, I guess, specifically that shouldn't take creatine, or anyone and everyone could probably take it?
It seems like anyone and everyone can take it at this point. I mean, obviously, if you're, you know, have a clinical condition, then check with your doctor before taking it. It seems like it might have therapeutic potential in quite a few clinical cases, but people are probably the most careful when it comes to like kids or teens. You know, it makes sense to kind of be more cautious about that, but so far it doesn't seem like it has any adverse effects in them taking them at the same dosages that are recommended for adults as well. Safe for pregnant women to take too. Yeah, creatine is one of the most studied supplements out there. It's validated and it's very safe. One thing we should actually talk about is what to look for in a creatine supplement, because there are a couple of, I mean, I've started to see it in soft drinks and things like that, which I don't recommend doing that as your main source of creatine. And also some of these other fancy ones that like advertise, you know, it'll get in quicker. It's a different formulation. The supplement to go with when it comes to creatine is just creatine monohydrate. Just go with that. It's the most studied. If you want to find a good brand, one tip is to actually look up some creatine like scientific studies and see what brand they'll have it in the methods, what brand they use. I brought mine in case we want to give I think it's Optimum Nutrition like a plug. Yeah, but I use that one because that's the one that we use in the lab. Try look for one that's like it's kind of difficult with the supplement industry because it's not as always clear what like a certification means, but one that's like Sport Safe certified because it's less likely to have contaminants in it, and you know it's high quality. In that case, that's one of the reasons why I chose the brand that I'm using as well. I remember I think when I had creatine, I had ordered it from, it was called ATP Science, I think. And in their description of the product, it just said, if you've already done the research, you should know why you're taking this. That was their description, and that like they didn't actually tell you what it's for or why. It was like, if you're buying this right now, you should know why you're buying it. You should have done your research. And it was just really interesting. I was like, oh, there you go. So yeah, I mean, a lot of my one also doesn't have very detailed instructions on it really. It's like this 5 gram dosage. There you go. And so maybe they're channeling that philosophy as well, which isn't a bad one. But
well, at least then you know they're not trying to sell you anything. They're not trying to like put in fluff of like, you know, this is going to give you wings and and just making stuff up. That they generally like, if you know why you're taking it, then you would be buying this product sort of thing. That the product speaks for itself. We don't have to hype it up or make unsolicited claims and stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's just creatine monohydrate. It's real simple. Don't go for the fancy stuff. The stuff in the soft drinks, one of the reasons why it might not be very good is just the stability of it. When it's in a can that could have been there for God knows how long, it will start to actually degrade into creatinine. So you might get to it and it will have degraded. I mean, if you mix your creatine in water or something and you drink it over the day, it's not going to degrade over that period of time. But when you're talking about like a product that's, you know, somewhere that you're buying it from a supermarket, got a shelf life of like a few months or so.
Exactly.
Okay, so on to our next one.
So our next one is Beta-Alanine, which I haven't done any work with in the laboratory before, so I'd be kind of interested too. So Beta-Alanine is an amino acid. Again, we produce it ourselves, but mostly get it through meat products. So potentially a bit like creatine. Oh, sorry, just going back to the creatine thing. If you are plant-based and you want to do creatine, but you're like, how do they make it? Is it actually plant-based? Yes, it is. It's made out of like basically a type of salt and an ingredient that they use in toothpaste. They pressurize it, spin it up, and then like
There you go.
you heat it up and give it to you in a powder form. So yeah, you're okay to take it if you're plant-based. It's not coming from like a cow or something like that.
Yeah, like your bone broths and things like that.
Yeah. So we're going to get into energy systems again, but this time we're going to talk about one which it fuels the cell for the next kind of duration up, I guess you could say. So like beyond that 10-second mark up to 30 seconds, I mean, beta-alanine seems to help when you get further down in duration. But that's the second energy system is anaerobic glycolysis. And that's the one where as a byproduct of that, you'll hear this talked about in the gym all the time, you get lactic acid and you start to feel that in your muscles, and it's quite painful. But what that's indicating is when you're working and that energy system is doing a large component of the work, because none of these energy systems are just like an on-off switch. Like there'll be some contribution from one or the other. But when that's doing a large component of the work, the environment inside your muscles becoming more acidic, basically, and that's what causes that muscle pain, and eventually for you to decide to be like, oh, this is too hard, I'm going to stop. So beta-alanine is important for that energy system because it's a precursor to carnosine, and that's important because carnosine acts in your muscle as a buffer when your muscle becomes too acidic. So you're basically like toning down the acidity if you've got more carnosine there. Carnosine actually is its own, you'll see it on the shelves as its own supplement. That's not what you want. If you ingest it as a supplement, it just gets degraded down into, I guess, what its constituents are, which are beta-alanine and L-histidine. So like it doesn't end up being shuttled to the muscle and stored there. Beta-alanine does seem to result in carnosine storage increase inside of the muscle, and that's why it's the ergogenic one. So given that it increases muscle carnosine concentration, you can then kind of predict what sort of exercise performance or exercise performance benefits it's going to confer, because they're related to exercise that involves that energy system. So you're looking at like high intensity anaerobic exercise that usually lasts for longer than 30 seconds up to 4 minutes. Pretty much. So what can we think of that are like that? I guess I've got time trials type exercises.
Sprints,
CrossFit. Sprints as long as they're longer than 30 seconds. Certain CrossFit WODs would probably fall into that category where you'd see a benefit. Like some kayaking races, rowing. That's also something that's often done in CrossFit as well, like on the erg. So it seems to provide a benefit when you're supplementing with it on exercise bouts greater than 4 minutes but less than 25.
Less than 25. Well, I guess if you are doing purely high intensity anaerobic exercise, you're not going to be lasting much longer than 25 minutes as well, probably. Or using that system anyway.
Where that system is contributing, because over 4 minutes but less than 25, there'll be a considerable contribution from your aerobic system as well, but you'll still be relying a bit on the anaerobic glycolytic system to be giving the cell energy as well. But so that's what beta-alanine is and what it does.
Awesome. So what's the supplementation process with it? Is that similar to creatine or slightly different?
It's similar to creatine in that you need to be consuming it every day for the period of time, or to continue to see an effect, but you have to have been consuming it for at least a minimum of 2 weeks. And the recommended dosage is between 4 and 6 grams a day. If you're going to do it for 2 weeks, what you'll see is like a 20 to 30% increase in muscle carnosine if you pull that out and you've been doing it for longer, then it moves up to 40-60 after about 4 weeks, and then after 10 weeks it's, you know, adds even more until it sort of reaches a saturation level, but like what we talked about with creatine. So both of these supplements are ones that you really like commit to. They're part of your life once you decide to take them.
Like you said, it's not sort of a one-off, like caffeine might be, like you might just have an event on the weekend and think, oh, I'm going to have a hit of caffeine to help sort of boost me through an event. Like you said, these have to be on board to build up in your system to then have that effect in a period of time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then if you decide to stop taking it, it will take about 6 to 15 weeks for you to return back to baseline levels of carnosine. It is a bit more expensive than creatine. I think I worked out that it's about, in New Zealand dollars, it's about 90 cents per 5 gram dosage. So you may want to decide to cycle on and off it, just depending on how much you're willing to spend, because that is a bit more expensive really. If you're about $1 a day for each time that you're taking it, that can add up over the course of a year. So I didn't actually work out what creatine is per dosage, but I'm pretty sure it's less than that.
And would these be supplements that you could be using together if you are, like we said, something maybe like CrossFit or a type of exercise training that fits in that sort of realm? Because there is, obviously they're working on different systems, but if you're training or exercising in a way that is using kind of both those systems.
CrossFit's the best example of that, really. And I'm pretty sure a lot of CrossFit athletes, like the elite ones, take both of these. Usually, if, like, say you were just doing you're a weightlifter, like an Olympic weightlifter or a power lifter, taking creatine is the best thing for you to be taking. You wouldn't really benefit that much from the beta-alanine stuff. CrossFit has that mixture of like weightlifting and then the sort of metabolic conditioning kind of workouts where you're doing the high intensity cardio stuff, as well as a decent amount of like intermittent resistance sort of exercises. So it would be quite helpful for that. Creatine in particular for allowing you to tolerate like a bigger training volume, and then beta-alanine for some of those more metcon type workout, or the ones that you end up doing. No,
they both sound like very beneficial supplements to have on board, and in regards to sort of, like we've always said, weighing up that sort of cost analysis of the benefits versus the risk. Definitely the benefits seem to outweigh the pretty much non-significant risk of taking it. And I mean, if I was to have to pick one of what I would take, I would pick creatine to take long term. It's cheaper. It suits personally the types of exercise that I engage in, and also it seems to have those health benefits as well, particularly like in retaining muscle mass as you get older and you're still engaging in resistance training. I think that would be the one that I picked. If I was preparing for some type of competition that uses, I've got to do training that uses both these energy systems, and then the competition relies on largely these energy systems, then I would supplement with beta-alanine and prep for that. And prep and then during that. That would be the way that I personally would approach it. In terms of like your general gym goer who wants to maybe like improve their body composition, and they're doing a mixture of like resistance training as well as something like sprint or cardio exercise, probably again I would just go with the creatine. I think that would be my assessment. What do you reckon? I would think so, like you said, especially probably weighing up the costs and things like that, and the gain you're going to get from it, working out whether that's really worthwhile for you. Specifically, I guess if you're not training for some sort of competition or event, I would think that you're going to get just as good bang from your buck using creatine.
Sweet, I think.
If people have any more questions on these supplements, where can they find you?
Oh, Charlie J. Connell on Instagram.
Woo! Yeah. And as always, make sure you're following along at WeAreRiseNZ on Instagram for any updates, or check us out on YouTube, Rise Make Life Work Out. And we'll see you next time for another episode.